Alright, so we're going to do a jaw control, and bear with me because it's been a while since I've done this. So first and foremost, we want to make sure that we are in the orthographic side view. And you'll find that underneath the panels. And the thing that we're going to make first are our joints. So if you've been following along, you've already, deleted and modified your history for your previous lessons. Do not do it again because it will delete your blend shapes you've made and all the controls that you've made. You always want to just do it first before you start rigging and then never do it again. So now that we have it all set up, we want to make sure we press the space bar. We're going to find our skeleton tab and go to joint tool. And I'm just going to click that. And I'm using the grid right here to kind of help me decide where I want it to go, and I just ghosted that for a bit, X-ray. And I'm just going to click the first joint right here, and you can just left click and it'll pop up. And then I'm just going to go right about there. And then my last joint, I'm going to just go to the tip of the lip. So now we have our joint hierarchy all set up, and I'm going to go ahead and go into orthographic front. And it's set up straight down the middle, which is nice. You never want to do this in perspective because you always risk the chance of not having a completely on the grid joint system. So now that's all set up, I can go back into perspective, and I want to bind these joints to the geometry so that it will move the geometry. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select our joint system, and then I'm going to go ahead and select the geometry. And notice I'm not selecting the eyes because we don't want them to be mapped as well. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go to Animation tab on the top, Skin, Bind Skin, Smooth Binding, Options box. Now I'm looking at my options box and everything seems pretty good. We want to make sure our bind is to the joint hierarchy. The bind method is the closest in hierarchy. Skinning method is the classic linear, and normalized weights is interactive. Now you can decide what your max influence is. I'm just going to put it at 1, and I'm going to put my drop off rate to about 10, and apply. So now if I move my joints here and I rotate them, first joint will actually rotate pretty much the whole head, and the second joint, which is our jaw joint, will rotate like the front of the face. So it has a little more influence than we would want it to be, and that's because this is the default of Maya. So the way we fix that and let the computer know that we don't want the whole face is we're going to paint weight maps. So I'm just going to go ahead and get out of the X-ray and select my object. I'm going to go to Skin, Edit Smooth Skin, Paint Skin Weights tool, Options box. Now as you can see, we have our joint systems on the side here. We have joint 1 and joint 2. Now when we click those, you can see that we have black and white going on. Now white is the influence that that joint is having over the geometry. Black is no influence at all. So when we have joint 1, what do we have? We have that whole face in the front, which is why the whole face is moving when we move that joint. So in order to fix that, what we need to do is we have to go to our joint 2, and we have to paint over that influence. Or sorry, joint 1, and paint over the black so that we decrease the influence on joint 2. Now you're asking me, Erica, well, why can't I just subtract paint? Well, the reason for that is when you subtract paint, all the influence that you're taking away is being given to the whole joint system. So if you're working on a full body and you take away an influence from, say, the jaw, that influence will go into the fingers, all sorts of different joints, and you don't want your fingers to control your jaw. So it's just easier to decide for the computer where that influence is going to go. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm on interactive. I've got my my brush setting. I'm not using a hard brush setting because I want to have some flexibility. If we want more of a rigid look, we'll use a harder brush. And I go ahead and I'm going to find my paint operations and make sure that it's clicked on the replace. And you can see on the bottom here, you can change your value, you can change your opacity. Right now our paintbrush is a pretty decent size, but if you want to switch the sizing of your paintbrush, that'd be under your radius up top. Okay, so now we have our joint system. I'm going to go ahead and click joint 1, and it's going to paint white for us because we're increasing the influence, remember, so that we can decrease the influence in the other joint. So when I go ahead and paint across the face like this, and now I'm going to switch back to the other joint, you can see it has a direct influence on that other joint. So I'm going to go ahead and paint all over this face. And I'm going to increase my brush to about 5 to make this a bit quicker. And you can change your settings as needed. You can also switch this to the colored mode. Pretty sure that's under display. Multicolored feedback. So you can see that. You can also change it so that you can see it in more than black and white. And that helps you if, say, you're missing a couple spots that you can't quite see. And that's under gradient, use color map. So you can see here, this is still missing some of the influence. So if I want to just go ahead and really turn that white, it's not a lot of influence, but it's still, it's always better to be safe than sorry. And that way I can make sure that this joint here has all the influence that we want it to have. The other thing you have to be careful with is that you don't miss the little pockets that are sometimes in these areas. For instance, the nose. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. So you can see that the inside of that nose, I almost missed that part. And that would have moved with everything else and caused a pretty nasty deformation, which I don't want. So now that I've got that, what I can do is I could actually go up to my brushes, and there's some nice little extras that you can do. So under the paint operation, I can go into smooth, and it will just smooth that out. So as I've said before, the black is no influence, the white is influence. So when we have like a grayish area, it's sort of an in-between. And that's how we get our stretchiness when we do these. Okay, so now I'm just going to go ahead and grab my joint. I'm going to rotate that and see what it looks like. This is not quite where I want it yet. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my geometry again, go to my skin, edit smooth skin, and I want to go into my paint skin weights tool options box. Now that's a lot of white, and I think I must have accidentally done that. So what I want to do is I want to go back to my joint 2, And I'm going to bring some of that back. And the way that might have happened is if I had gone into the smooth tool, it was trying to compensate. And that happens sometimes. I'm going to go back to my replace. And I'm going to go ahead and paint some of that jaw on the bottom. I'm also going to go inside. And I'm going to paint the bottom of the mouth. It's a little more difficult to do. And it should work a little bit better. So now I go back into my move tool, and keep in mind every time you go into your move tool, you're going to have to go find your paint weights tool again. So now when I turn this, you can see we're starting to get that jaw a little bit more. And I can just go ahead and actually, I can rotate this down and I can paint it like that. So I grab my geometry and I can go to my skin, edit smooth skin tool, and go ahead and find my paint weights tool, which is right here, options box. And I can see there's white there. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my joint 1, and I'm going to size down my brush to 0.2, and I'm going to go ahead and paint. And already you can see it has a direct influence just as I'm painting. You just have to make sure that if you are going to do it this way, that you set your joints back to where they were supposed to be. So as I start to paint the mouth here, it's starting to return to where it was before. And sometimes this is an easier way to do it than just leaving it as is. So I do want the top of this mouth to have a little less influence than the bottom of the mouth. And you can see now that jaw is working a whole lot better. And I'm trying to keep this area fairly gray. I'm going to switch over to my smooth tool. I'm just going to smooth out this area in here just a bit. And that's pretty nice. I like that. Now I can keep adjusting this as needed. But painting weights takes a while, so I just wanted to give you the basics of how to do it. So now I've got a jaw control that works halfway decent. And later when we have finished our jaw control, and you can see here, again, you always want to stretch your limits because you never know what you forgot. In this case, I did not paint the inner eyelids, so I'd have to fix that later and just paint over it. But for the most part, the jaw is working pretty nicely. Now, I don't like these little deformations on the side, and I would continuously keep painting until it's nice and smooth, and it finally gets to the point where I want. But in general, it's just trial and error until you get it to the point where you are happy with it. And that's it.